Maya walked slowly along the quiet evening street. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. She held her small bag close and smiled as she thought about the visit she had just finished. Her father, Judge Harris, had spoken to her in his usual calm voice, sharing stories from his day at court. He often reminded her of the value of fairness, kindness, and patience. To Maya, her father was more than a respected judge. He was her guide, her example of how one should live in this world. She walked past tall trees that swayed gently with the wind. The sound of children playing in the distance made her think about her own childhood. She had grown up in a home filled with books and laughter. Her father had always encouraged her to speak her mind, to hold her head high, and to believe. That dignity mattered more than anything else. Maya felt grateful. Even though life was not always easy, she carried inside her the lessons of strength and resilience. As she moved further down the street, she noticed how peaceful the neighborhood looked. The lamps were beginning to glow, casting warm light on the path. A shopkeeper closed his store, waving goodnight to her. She waved back politely, her smile gentle and calm. Maya always believed that small gestures of kindness could bring light into people's days. She had learned that from her father as well. Inside her heart, she felt proud of being his daughter. Judge Harris was known in the community not only for his wisdom but also for his fairness. People respected him deeply. They said he never let power change his heart. He always remembered that behind every case there were human lives and emotions. For Maya, that example meant everything. She dreamed of one day making her own mark in the world, carrying the same sense of honesty and justice. The evening breeze brushed against her face as she thought about how life often gave her father difficult choices. She had seen him sit in his study late at night, reading documents, thinking hard before making decisions. He always reminded her that real strength was not shown through force, but through patience and balance. Maya carried those words in her heart like a shield. Walking down that street, she felt a quiet joy. The world around her seemed calm, almost comforting. She looked at the families gathering for dinner in their homes, the smell of warm food drifting from the windows. She loved these simple things, the ordinary rhythm of life. To her, they were reminders that beauty did not always come from grand events. Sometimes it was hidden in small, everyday moments. Maya thought again about the conversation with her father earlier that evening. He had told her, "Remember, Maya, your dignity is your crown. Never let anyone take it from you." His voice had been steady, filled with both strength and tenderness. She had nodded, feeling those words sink deep inside her. She held those thoughts close as she continued walking. Her steps were light, her heart steady. She had no idea that the peace of this evening would soon be tested. For now, though, she allowed herself to breathe in the calm air, to enjoy the quiet, and to feel proud of where she came from. The street was nearly empty except for a few neighbors heading home. A car passed slowly, its headlights brightening the path before her. She stepped aside politely, waiting for it to move on. She never liked rushing through life. She believed in walking at her own pace, in noticing the details others might ignore. The color of the flowers by the fence, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance, the warmth of the streetlights, all of it seemed alive to her. Maya was not someone who sought attention. She liked to live quietly, with humility, just as her father had taught her. Yet she carried herself with a certain confidence. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength that came from years of watching her father stand tall in the face of challenges. Her father's reputation had shaped her identity. People often recognized her as the judge's daughter, and while she respected that, she also wanted to be known for her own heart and character. Tonight, as she walked alone, she reminded herself that she was not only her father's child, she was also Maya, someone with dreams, hopes, and the ability to face the world with courage. She thought about the future and what it might hold. Perhaps she would follow in her father's footsteps and work in law, or maybe she would choose another path. What mattered most to her was staying true to the values she had been given: respect for others, fairness in every action, and the belief that kindness had power. The sky grew darker, but the streetlights made the path clear. She walked with ease, her mind full of memories and hopes. She remembered times when her father had told her stories about his own youth, about how he had faced prejudice and unfairness, but had never let it harden his heart. Those stories always moved her. They made her realize that strength did not come from anger. It came from self-control and the choice to rise above cruelty. Maya took a deep breath of the evening air and smiled. She felt safe, secure in the world. Her father had worked so hard to protect. She did not know what waited ahead, but she believed she had the strength to face it. Tonight felt like any other night. Quiet, ordinary, filled with the warmth of simple moments. Her footsteps echoed, gently on the pavement as she turned a corner, heading toward the main road. She thought once again about her father's words, about dignity being her crown. Those words seemed to shine inside her like a lantern. She whispered softly to herself, almost like a promise, "I will always remember." At that moment, everything around her seemed calm and steady. The night carried no sign of what was coming. For now, Maya was simply a daughter walking home, her heart full of pride and her spirit at peace. Maya's footsteps carried her closer to the main road. The soft glow of the lamps lit her way, and she felt the cool breeze brushing against her face. She was still holding on to her father's words, repeating them in her mind as if they were a quiet melody. The street was calm, and she believed the evening would end just as peacefully as it had begun. As she approached the corner, she noticed a patrol car parked near the side of the road. Two officers stood nearby, talking quietly to each other. Maya had seen officers before during her walks, and she had never felt uneasy. She always believed that law officers were protectors of the community, people who worked to keep everyone safe. With that thought, she kept her steps steady. One of the officers turned and noticed her. His eyes followed her as she walked, and soon his voice called out, asking her to stop. Maya hesitated for a moment. She looked around, realizing she was the only one on that side of the street. She felt a slight unease, but reminded herself to remain calm. Her father had always said that respect and patience could soften tense moments. She turned to face the officer politely. The man stepped closer and began to ask her questions. His tone was sharp, his words quick. He wanted to know where she was going, why she was walking there at that hour, and what she carried in her bag. Maya answered with gentle honesty, explaining that she was returning home from her father's house. She even mentioned her father's name, believing that would bring clarity to the situation. But instead of easing, the officer's tone grew heavier. He seemed dissatisfied with her answers, repeating his questions as though he did not trust her. Maya felt the knot of unease tighten inside her chest. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet the way he looked at her made her feel like she was being judged unfairly. Still, she remembered her father's voice in her heart. Patience shows strength. She kept her tone soft and respectful. She did not raise her voice, nor did she let frustration break through. Instead, she explained again that she was simply walking home after visiting her father, Judge Harris. The other officer, who had been standing a short distance away, now watched silently. His expression was less severe, almost uncertain. Maya noticed the difference but said nothing. She focused on keeping her own presence steady. As the questions continued, Maya realized that this moment was turning into something more serious than it should have been. Her thoughts began to race. Why was she being stopped like this? Why were her answers not enough? She felt the weight of suspicion pressing on her, though she had done nothing to deserve it. Her heart pounded, but she held her ground. She stood, tall, just as her father had taught her. Her voice did not shake when she spoke. "I am going home," she said clearly. "I have nothing to hide." The officer's eyes narrowed as though he did not like her calmness. It was almost as if her composure unsettled him. He asked for her identification, and Maya quickly reached into her bag to take it out. She handed it over with steady hands. The officer examined it for a long moment, then looked back at her as though searching for a reason to doubt her still. The silence between them grew heavy. Maya could hear the distant sound of cars on the main road, but here in this small corner, the world felt strangely still. She felt the watchful eyes of the second officer, who now shifted uncomfortably, as though uncertain of what was happening. Maya decided to speak again, her voice gentle but firm. "Sir, I respect your duty, but I have told you the truth. I am only going home. Please, may I continue my walk?" Her words carried both politeness and quiet strength. She did not argue, yet she also did not allow fear to take away her dignity. The officer stared at her, his jaw tight. For a brief moment, Maya felt her heart sink, unsure of how he would respond. But before anything else could happen, the second officer stepped closer. He cleared his throat softly and asked his colleague if everything was all right. His tone carried a hint of caution, almost as if he wanted to remind him that others were watching. That small interruption shifted the air. The first officer looked away, muttering something under his breath. He handed back Maya's identification with a sharp movement. Maya accepted it calmly, slipping it back into her bag. She looked at both officers, her face steady, her eyes filled with quiet strength. She did not raise her voice, nor did she linger. She simply nodded politely and turned to continue her walk. Her steps were measured, her posture straight. She knew the moment had been tense, and though the situation was not fully resolved, she believed she had handled it with dignity. As she walked away, she could still feel the weight of the encounter pressing on her heart. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "Your dignity is your crown." She held those words tightly, knowing they had guided her through this test. Behind her, the two officers remained. One looked uneasy, shifting from foot to foot. The other watched her retreating figure with unreadable eyes. The street grew quiet once more, but for Maya, the silence now carried a deeper meaning. She knew that not every moment in life would be fair. She understood that sometimes people would see her through eyes clouded with doubt, but she also knew that her response mattered more than their judgment. Tonight she had chosen patience and strength over fear, and in that choice, she had protected her dignity. As the main road came into view, Maya felt the tension in her chest slowly ease. The noise of passing cars, the sight of familiar buildings, and the warmth of streetlights gave her a sense of safety again. She walked with renewed steadiness, holding her head high. She did not know that this moment was only the beginning. She did not know that soon her strength would be tested again, in a way that would draw even more eyes upon her. For now, she simply continued forward, carrying the quiet weight of what had just passed, unaware that the night's story was far from finished. Maya stepped onto the main road, believing the moment of unease was behind her. The sound of cars moving past and the brighter lights gave her comfort. Yet, as she walked a little further, she realized the patrol car was still there. The same officer who had questioned her earlier moved closer once more, his steps quick and firm. Maya stopped, her breath steady but her heart beating faster. She turned to face him politely, not wanting to seem as though she was running away. The second officer followed too, though at a slower pace, his expression uncertain. The first officer's voice cut through the air. He demanded again to know where she was going and why she was out at that hour. His words were sharp, as though he had not accepted the answers she had already given. Maya tried to remain calm. She folded her hands gently in front of her and repeated, With patience, "I am returning home after visiting my father." Her tone was respectful, yet inside she felt the pressure of the moment growing stronger. The people on the sidewalk began to notice the scene. A man waiting at the bus stop turned his head to watch. A woman carrying groceries slowed her pace, her eyes fixed on the exchange. The quiet air of the night started to shift, replaced by the heavy feeling of attention gathering. Maya could sense the change. She did not want trouble, but she also knew she could not let her dignity fall. She stood upright, her eyes steady, her voice calm. The officer, however, seemed unsettled by her composure. His face grew tense and his words carried impatience. The second officer finally stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "She has already shown identification," he said carefully. His tone was almost like a reminder, gentle yet firm. But the first officer brushed off the comment, keeping his gaze fixed on Maya. Maya felt the tension tighten like a rope around her. She thought of her father's lessons, the countless times he had reminded her that patience was not weakness. She remembered his steady eyes and calm tone whenever he spoke about standing tall in difficult moments. Holding those memories close, she drew strength from them. She spoke again, her words deliberate and measured. "I respect your position, but I have told you the truth. I have shown you proof of who I am. Please allow me to continue my walk." Her voice did not waver. Her words carried not anger but quiet strength, and the small crowd now watching could sense it. Some of them took out their phones, quietly raising them to record. Maya noticed this from the corner of her eye. She understood what it meant. The world beyond this street might see what was happening. That thought gave her courage, but it also placed weight on her shoulders. Every move, every word, would now carry meaning not only for her, but for anyone who might later watch. The officer's face tightened further. His authority felt challenged, not by loud defiance, but by her calm dignity. That seemed to frustrate him more than anything else. He stepped closer, his voice rising slightly, telling her to stay where she was. Maya did not step back. She kept her feet planted, her chin raised gently. Inside, her heart was racing, but she did not let it show. Her father's words echoed again and again. "Your dignity is your crown." The crowd grew a little larger. The man at the bus stop moved closer. The woman with groceries stood still, and a group of young people walking by paused to watch. The air filled with murmurs, whispers of disbelief at what they were seeing. The second officer now looked visibly uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at the small crowd. His eyes moved from Maya to his colleague, as if silently urging him to end the confrontation. But the first officer remained unmoved. He repeated his demands, though by now they no longer carried clarity. They sounded more like stubborn resistance to Maya's calm presence. Maya took a slow breath and decided to speak one last time, her voice calm yet steady enough for the crowd to hear. "I have answered every question. I have nothing more to prove. I ask only to be allowed to go home safely." Her words carried through the night air, and the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People whispered about fairness, about respect, about how a simple walk home should never turn into such a scene. The second officer finally stepped forward. His voice, though not raised, carried firmness. "That is enough," he said to his colleague. His eyes no longer showed hesitation. They showed decision. The crowd reacted with surprise. Some nodded, some whispered in agreement. The first officer looked at his colleague in disbelief, his jaw tightening, but the second officer stood his ground. Maya remained silent now. She simply stood where she was, her presence calm but unyielding. The strength of her silence seemed louder than any words she could have spoken. The first officer glanced around at the crowd, at the phones recording, at his colleague standing firm. His authority no longer held the same weight it had minutes ago. His face showed conflict, but no matter how he tried, the moment had slipped away from his control. Maya looked at him once more, not with anger, but with the same calm dignity she had carried from the beginning. Then, turning to the second officer, she gave a small nod of respect. The night air felt heavy, yet charged with meaning. The confrontation had not broken her. It had instead revealed the strength she carried inside. A strength born from her father's teachings, from her own quiet courage, and now witnessed by a growing circle of people. As she finally began to move forward, the crowd made space for her. Some smiled gently, some whispered words of encouragement, and some simply watched with respect. She walked past them with steady steps, her head held high, her spirit unshaken. The second officer remained behind, his eyes following her with a look of quiet support. The first officer stood rigid, his face clouded, yet unable to stop what had already unfolded. Maya did not look back. She knew the night was not over, but she also knew that this moment had shown something powerful. Dignity, patience, and strength could stand firm even against unfairness. And in that truth, she found a deeper sense of courage than ever before. The night air felt heavier as Maya continued her steady walk forward. The small crowd that had gathered parted respectfully, allowing her to pass. Their eyes followed her, some filled with admiration, others with quiet disbelief at what they had just witnessed. For Maya, every step carried meaning. She knew her choice to stay calm had prevented the situation from spiraling further, yet she also understood that the story was not finished. Behind her, the two officers remained. The first officer stood still, his face tense and rigid. The second officer glanced at him, his eyes no longer uncertain but thoughtful. Something had shifted within him. He had seen the dignity in Maya's composure, and he had also seen the growing disapproval in the eyes of the community watching. It was clear to him now that silence could no longer be an option. Maya, though moving forward, was aware of the weight that lingered behind her. She could still hear the murmurs of the crowd and the faint shuffle of the officers' steps. She knew her calmness had unsettled the first officer, but she also sensed that her presence had awakened something in the second. The bus at the corner arrived and a few people boarded, but many chose to remain where they were. They felt that something important was happening, something larger than a simple evening walk. Their phones remained raised, their eyes alert, their voices whispering quietly about fairness, about respect, and about the need for truth. The second officer finally spoke more openly to his colleague. His tone was low but firm enough for those nearby to hear. "She has done nothing wrong," he said. "We need to let this go." His words were not just to calm the moment, but to remind his partner of the duty they had sworn to uphold. The first officer turned sharply toward him, his jaw tight. But the weight of the crowd's watchful eyes made his reaction less certain. Authority had always given him control in such moments, yet tonight that control seemed to slip from his hands. He could feel the shift, and it unsettled him deeply. Maya slowed her pace slightly, turning her head just enough to glance back. Her eyes met the second officer's for a brief moment. In that silent exchange, she sensed something important. He was beginning to choose integrity over silence. The crowd noticed too. Whispers turned into soft words of encouragement. Some spoke of courage, others spoke of fairness, and all seemed to sense that this night was becoming more than just an ordinary scene. Maya stopped walking. She stood tall, her shoulders relaxed, but her presence commanding. She did not speak. Immediately, allowing the silence to grow. Then, in a calm and steady voice, she said, "All I have asked is to go home safely. That is my right, just as it is for anyone here." Her words carried through the air, clear and unwavering. The people around her nodded, some even whispering, "That's true," while others lifted their phones higher. The second officer took a slow breath. For the first time that evening, he stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Maya and his colleague. His body language was quiet but powerful. It was a silent message that he was no longer going to stand aside. The crowd noticed this change immediately. A ripple of relief spread among them. The woman with groceries let out a soft sigh, and the man at the bus stop crossed his arms, nodding in approval. Young people recording whispered to one another about how important this moment felt. Maya's heart felt lighter as she saw the shift. She had not raised her voice. She had not let anger guide her, yet her calm strength had moved someone to act. That was the power her father had always spoken about. True strength did not need to shout. True strength revealed itself in stillness, in patience, in quiet dignity that could not be shaken. The first officer, however, struggled with the growing pressure. His eyes darted toward the crowd, then to his colleague, then back to Maya. He felt the control slipping further, and his silence spoke louder than his words. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what to do. Maya did not gloat, nor did she show triumph. She simply stood with the same steady presence, her face calm, her eyes clear. She understood that the turning point was not about proving superiority. It was about proving that dignity, respect, and patience could overcome even the hardest of moments. The second officer finally addressed the crowd. His voice was calm, professional, but firm. "Everything is fine," he said. "She has the right to continue her walk. Thank you for your patience." The words settled over the group like a wave of relief. People lowered their phones slightly, though many continued recording, knowing the importance of keeping the truth alive. Some even called out softly, "Thank you," while others looked at Maya with admiration. Maya gave a small nod of respect toward the second officer. She knew his choice had not been easy. Standing against a colleague was never simple, yet he had chosen what was right. That decision, she realized, carried as much courage as her own choice to remain calm. She began to walk again, the crowd slowly dispersing, but the moment lingered in the air. People spoke in low voices as they left, carrying with them the memory of what they had witnessed. They knew they had seen more than just a confrontation. They had seen the strength of one young woman's dignity and the courage of one officer's decision to uphold fairness. As Maya moved further down the road, she breathed deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs. Her heart still carried the weight of the encounter, but it also carried a new lightness. She had discovered something within herself that even she had not fully known before. Strength was not in power, nor in force. Strength was in calmness, in patience, in the ability to stand tall without breaking. The second officer watched her go, his thoughts heavy but clear. He knew the night had changed him as well. He had seen the danger of silence and the importance of stepping forward when justice demanded it. He remained standing on that street long after Maya had disappeared from sight, his heart filled with questions, but also with resolve. The first officer, however, stood apart, silent and rigid. His thoughts were clouded with conflict, but deep. Inside, he could not ignore the truth of what had unfolded. The crowd's disapproval, his colleague's decision, and Maya's unshaken dignity, all of it pressed against him in ways he could not easily escape. Maya continued home, her steps calm, her spirit unbroken. She did not know how the story would spread, nor how others might speak of it later. All she knew was that she had held on to her father's words, and they had guided her through. "Your dignity is your crown," she whispered to herself once. More, her eyes lifting toward the night sky. And with that thought she walked on, carrying her strength like a light into the darkness. The night was quiet again as Maya walked farther from the place of confrontation. The crowd had slowly dispersed, and the sound of footsteps and murmurs faded into the distance. Yet, within her heart, the echoes of that moment remained alive. She could still feel the sharp questions, the heavy eyes upon her, and the tension that had weighed down the air. But more than that, she remembered the shift, the moment when dignity had spoken louder than anger, when truth had begun to shine. Through silence, Maya's steps were steady, but her thoughts moved quickly. She replayed every word, every look, every silence. She thought about the people who had stood and watched, the ones who had recorded, and the ones who had whispered words of support. She wondered how they felt now as they returned to their homes. Did they feel encouraged? Did they feel a sense of responsibility to speak out for fairness in their own ways? For Maya, the experience had become more than just an encounter. It was a lesson written deep into her heart. She realized that her father's words were not only advice for moments of personal challenge, they were guiding lights meant for times, like this, when patience and composure were tested in front of others. As she walked, she remembered his steady voice. Maya, when you carry yourself with dignity, you do not stand alone. Even those who may be silent at first will eventually see the truth and be moved by it. She had seen that with her own eyes tonight. The second officer, who had once stood quietly in the background, had found his courage. And the crowd, who had first only watched, had begun to speak and show support. Her heart filled with both relief and quiet pride. She had not wanted attention, nor had she sought to be a symbol. She only wanted to walk home in peace. Yet, in that ordinary wish, she had discovered that her response could inspire others. That thought gave her strength, though it also placed a responsibility on her shoulders. The street grew quieter as she moved closer to her home. She looked up at the windows of houses glowing softly with light. Families were gathered around dinner tables, sharing meals, laughter, and stories. The sight warmed her heart. It reminded her of the simple joy of being together, of living in peace. She wished deeply that everyone could have such moments without fear or tension. At one corner, Maya noticed a young boy sitting on the steps of a shop, watching her with curious eyes. His mother stood nearby, waiting for the bus. The boy tugged at his mother's hand and whispered something, his eyes still fixed on Maya. She offered him a gentle smile, and his face lit up with a shy grin. That small exchange touched her deeply. She wondered if he had seen part of what had happened earlier. If so, she hoped what he carried from it was not fear, but the belief that calmness and truth had power. The walk felt longer than usual, not because of distance, but because of the weight of reflection. Each step carried her closer to home, but also deeper into thought. She realized that courage did not always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes it was simply refusing to let fear take control. Sometimes it was standing tall and speaking with steady words, even when one's heart was beating fast. She thought again about the second officer. His decision to step forward had been a turning point. Without his choice, the night might have unfolded differently. Maya respected that courage deeply. She knew it was never easy to stand against someone close, especially in a profession built on loyalty and trust. Yet he had done so, guided by a sense of fairness. That choice, too, was growth. As she turned onto a quieter street, the night seemed softer. The air carried the faint scent of flowers from nearby gardens. The leaves rustled gently in the breeze. Maya felt a sense of peace begin to settle over her again, though her mind remained alert. She whispered softly to herself, "Strength is in patience. Courage is in calmness." Her father's house came into view, its warm lights glowing like a beacon. She quickened her pace slightly, eager to share her thoughts with him. She knew he would understand, and she longed to hear his wisdom. She imagined the expression on his face when she told him about the second officer's choice, about the crowd that had stood by, and about her own calm resolve. When she finally reached the front door, she paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of the night settled inside her, but so did a sense of pride. She was not the same as she had been when she started this walk. Something within her had grown stronger. She carried herself not just as a daughter of Judge Harris, but as a young woman who had lived through a test and had remained unshaken. Inside, her father was seated in his study, reading quietly as he often did. When he looked up and saw her, his face softened with warmth. "You're home," he said gently, setting his book aside. Maya walked to him, her eyes filled with both relief and thoughtfulness. She sat beside him and told him everything. She spoke of the officer's questions, her calm answers, the growing crowd, and the moment when silence gave way to courage. She told him how her heart had raced, yet her voice had remained steady. She shared how the second officer had stepped forward, changing the direction of the night. Her father listened without interruption, his eyes steady on her. When she finished, he reached out and placed his hand gently on hers. "Maya," he said softly, "you showed strength greater than many can imagine. You chose calmness over anger. You chose dignity over fear. And in doing so, you not only protected yourself, you inspired others." Maya felt tears well in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of his words. She leaned closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. In that moment, she felt safe, but also proud. Her father continued, his voice calm but firm. "Remember, true growth is not only in what you experience, but in how you use that experience to guide others. Tonight was not only about you. It was about everyone who saw you, everyone who will hear of you, and even those who may never meet you, but will feel the ripple of your courage." Maya closed her eyes, letting those words sink deep into her heart. She understood now that her walk home had become something larger than herself. It had become a lesson in dignity for everyone who had been present. The night grew late, but Maya did not feel tired. She felt renewed. She knew the path ahead might not always be easy, but she also knew she was ready. She had discovered her own strength, and that discovery had changed her. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock in Judge Harris's study. Maya sat beside her father, her head still resting lightly against his shoulder. She felt the warmth of his presence and the calm strength that always seemed to surround him. She had just told him everything about her walk, and now silence filled the room, carrying the weight of reflection. Her father finally spoke, his tone steady and thoughtful. "Maya, do you know why tonight matters?" Maya lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Because I stayed calm?" she asked softly. He nodded but leaned closer, his gaze deep. "Yes, but it is more than that. Tonight matters because your calmness became a mirror for others. It showed them the difference between right and wrong without you raising a single hand or voice. That is the power of dignity. It teaches without force." Maya thought about his words. She remembered the crowd, their whispering voices, their recording phones, their nods of approval when she spoke. She remembered the second officer's decision to step forward, and how that small act had changed the direction of the night. She realized now that her calmness had not been only for herself. It had shaped the choices of those around her. Her father continued, his voice carrying the weight of years of wisdom. "I have spent my life in courts, listening to voices rise, in anger, fear, or desperation. And I have learned that the strongest voice is not always the loudest. The strongest voice is the one that remains steady, even when tested. You found that voice tonight." Maya's eyes softened as she absorbed his words. She had felt nervous, even afraid at times during the encounter. But her father was right. She had not allowed those feelings to guide her. Instead, she had chosen stillness, and in that stillness, strength had been revealed. She thought of the first officer, his sharp tone, his unsettled face. She realized now that her calm presence had shown him something he did not expect. It had unsettled him not because of defiance, but because dignity was a kind of power he could not control. Her father placed his hand gently over hers again. Maya, there will always be moments in life where unfairness stands before you. Sometimes it will come in words, sometimes in silence, sometimes in actions. But never forget this: unfairness is loud only when dignity is absent. The moment you choose to stand with patience and self-respect, unfairness begins to lose its strength. Maya felt a quiet revelation rising in her heart. She had believed that dignity was something personal, a shield to protect herself. But now she understood it was also something larger, something that touched others. Dignity was not just a crown for one person, it was a light that could guide many. She leaned back in her chair, her thoughts carrying her back to the street. She could almost hear the whispers of the crowd again, see the glow of the streetlights, feel the tension of that moment. Yet when she remembered her own voice, steady and calm, she realized how much it had mattered. That single choice had shifted everything. Her father smiled gently, watching her face as she reflected. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked. Maya nodded slowly. "I do. Dignity is more than protection. It is influence. It can change what others see, what others feel, even what others choose." Judge Harris's eyes softened with pride. "Exactly. That is why I have always told you it is your crown. Crowns are not only worn, they are seen. And when others see yours, they are reminded of their own worth and responsibility." Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she fully understood the depth of her father's words. Tonight had not only been about her walk home, it had been about the silent lessons she carried from him, lessons that had lived within her and had now revealed themselves. The night grew later, but neither of them felt tired. They sat together, speaking softly about the meaning of courage, patience, and truth. Her father shared stories from his younger years, moments when he, too, had faced unfairness. He told her how he had once been tempted to let anger lead him, but how he had learned that calmness always created a stronger path. Maya listened with full attention. Every word felt like a thread, weaving her own story with his. She realized that the wisdom he had given her was not just advice. It was a living inheritance, and tonight, she had become part of its living proof. At one point, she asked him, "Father, do you think the people who saw will remember it?" Judge Harris leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes, people may forget words spoken in anger, but they never forget the image of dignity. It stays with them because it speaks to the best part of themselves. Those who recorded will carry the memory, those who whispered will retell it, and even those who stayed silent will feel its echo. Never doubt that." Maya closed her eyes briefly, taking in the weight of his reply. She thought again of the young boy at the shop who had smiled at her. She realized that even children, who might not fully understand, could still feel the presence of dignity. That thought filled her with hope. Her father rose from his chair and walked to the window. He looked out into the night sky, the stars, scattered across the dark canvas. "The world does not always change in grand moments, Maya," he said softly. "Sometimes it changes in the quiet steps of one person who chooses patience instead of fear. Tonight, you took those steps." Maya joined him at the window, standing beside him. She looked at the stars as well, their gentle glow reminding her of the lantern of strength she had carried inside. She whispered quietly, "Then I will keep walking that way, no matter what comes." Her father placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "And when you do, others will walk that way too." The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was full, rich with meaning. Maya felt as though the room itself carried the truth of their conversation. as though the stars. Outside listened and agreed. Her revelation was clear now. Dignity was not only hers to protect, it was hers to share through her presence, her choices, her calmness. She understood now why her father had always spoken of it as a crown. A crown was not hidden. It was seen, admired, and remembered. The clock ticked softly. Maya felt a sense of peace settle over her. The night had been difficult, but it had given her something greater than fear. It had given her understanding, and in that understanding, she found a deeper strength than she had ever known. The morning sun spread its golden light across the city. The streets slowly filled with people heading to work, shops opening their doors, and children walking to school with their backpacks swinging. For Maya, the brightness of the day felt like a gentle welcome after the storm of the night before. She walked through the neighborhood with quiet steps, her head high and her heart lighter. The whispers of last night had already begun to travel. As she passed the corner shop, she saw the young boy again. He was standing with his mother, holding a small bag of bread. When he saw Maya, he smiled wide and pointed at her, whispering something to his mother. The woman turned, her face warm, and nodded respectfully to Maya. That small moment touched her deeply. It showed her that even the youngest and the quietest had carried something away from what happened. Dignity was not only seen in the moment. It was remembered afterward, becoming a seed that grew in the hearts of others. At the courthouse, Judge Harris walked into his office as usual, his steps steady and calm. But he knew the air was different. His colleagues greeted him with respect, but also with a deeper awareness. Some of them had already heard about what happened on the street, while others had seen the recordings that had begun to spread. They had watched Maya standing tall, her calm voice steady even when questioned. They had seen the officer's sharp tone weaken under the weight of her quiet strength. Judge Harris said nothing about it at first. He carried himself as he always did, focusing on his work, his cases, and his duties. But inside, he felt a quiet pride. Not because the story had spread, but because the lessons he had poured into his daughter's heart had now blossomed in the world beyond their home. Maya, meanwhile, went on with her day. She attended her classes, spoke with her friends, and kept her smile bright. Yet everywhere she went, she noticed small shifts in how people looked at her. Some offered gentle nods, some gave her encouraging smiles, and some even stopped to say they admired her calmness. She accepted their words with humility, always replying the same way. "I only did what my father taught me." In the evening, she returned home again to her father's study. The two of them sat together just as they had the night before, but this time the air was not heavy with tension. It was filled with quiet joy. "Father," Maya said softly, "do you think this will last? Will people remember what happened? Or will it fade away?" Her father leaned back in his chair, his wise eyes calm. "Memories fade, Maya, but lessons do not. The details of last night may blur, but the feeling of it will remain in people's hearts. That is what matters." Maya thought about his words, realizing the truth. Even if the crowd forgot the exact words she had spoken or the exact expressions on the officers' faces, they would not forget the way dignity felt in that moment. It had touched something inside them, something that could not easily disappear. The following days confirmed her father's wisdom. The recordings of the event spread quietly, not as a scandal, but as a story of composure and courage. People shared it because they were moved by the calm strength Maya had shown. The focus was not on anger or conflict, but on the way dignity could stand like a shield without raising a hand. Some spoke of how it reminded them to stay patient in their own struggles. Others said it gave them hope that kindness and strength could still live together. And some admitted that it made them think differently about how they themselves treated others. Maya listened to these reflections with humility. she never let pride take root. Instead, she kept reminding herself of the truth her father had told her, that dignity was not hers alone, but something greater, something that touched everyone. Weeks passed, and life returned to its rhythm. Yet the bond between Maya and her father grew even deeper. Every evening they would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation. Their shared understanding of dignity became not just words, but a living presence between them. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, Maya spoke again. "Father, I feel like last night was more than just an event. It feels like it was a turning point for me." Judge Harris looked at her with gentle eyes. "It was. You stepped into a truth many take years to find. You learned that dignity is not only something you wear for yourself, it is something that can shape the world around you. That is a turning point not only for you, but for everyone who witnessed it." Maya smiled, her heart full. She knew her journey was only beginning. There would be other days, other challenges, and other moments when her strength would be tested, but she no longer feared them. She carried within her the quiet lantern of dignity, one that no storm could extinguish. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across their home, her father placed his hand over hers once more. "Maya," he said softly, "one day, I will not be here to remind you of these lessons, but you will not need me then, because you have made them your own. And when you pass them to others, my voice will live on through you." Her eyes grew warm with emotion, but she did not cry. Instead, she held his words close, knowing they were the truest gift he had ever given her. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought of the journey she had walked. From the quiet beginning of her evening walk to the sharp encounter on the street, to the crowd that gathered, to the conversations with her father, every moment had shaped her. She realized now that strength was not about overpowering others. Strength was about holding on to one's truth, even when tested. And so she drifted to sleep with a peaceful heart, carrying the crown of dignity not only for herself, but for all, who looked to her as an example. In the days that followed, the story of Maya became more than just a passing moment. It became a quiet legacy in her community. Children whispered her name with admiration, adults spoke of her as a reminder of grace, and officers themselves began to reflect on their duty with deeper care. Maya never sought the attention, nor did she crave recognition. She simply lived, as her father had taught her, with patience, calmness, and strength. And in doing so, she left behind a mark deeper than she ever imagined. The legacy of dignity had begun with her father's wisdom. Now it flowed through her, and one day it would pass on to others still. It was a legacy not of words or titles, but of presence. A legacy that would outlast the moment, outlast the whispers, and live in the hearts of those who understood its truth. And so, the story of Maya did not end with that night. It continued, quietly and powerfully, in the lives she touched, in the hope she inspired, and in the truth she carried forward. For dignity, once chosen, never fades. It shines like a crown, visible not only on the head of the one who wears it, but in the eyes of all who see it.